at the companies the recruiters are trying to recruit out of. So let's say during the research process, a recruiter calls a company and says, let me talk to your SAP guy who does accounts receivable. And to the receptionist, they don't know who that is. To them, it just sounds like somebody in the computer department. So they're going to get transferred to the wrong person, they're going to get wrong names, and it's going to follow up their recruiting process. And so what ends up happening is that it degenerates into keyword matching. The recruiter gets a list of qualifications from the client company, and they look for resumes that have those keywords on them. And that's not a very sophisticated way to conduct a search. Therefore, when you're sending a resume to a recruiter, there's some resume tips that you might want to keep in mind. First of all, they get hundreds of resumes a day. So they probably have instructions for submitting your resume on their website, and you should follow those as closely as you can. Usually it specifies the document format that they're willing to accept. And you know, if they say they want Word documents, don't send a PDF because that's just going to confuse them. Just follow their instructions as closely as you can. If you're sending them a resume in response to a posting on their website, or especially if you're just sending a resume that says, here's my resume, please keep me in mind for any searches you might open that look qualified, you're definitely not going to get anywhere doing that. By contrast, if a recruiter talks to you on the phone and specifically asks you for a resume, you know, that's a good sign. That means that they're going to get it and they're going to read it. So that's the difference between a solicited and an unsolicited resume. Because if they talk to you on the phone and ask you to send a resume, they're going to remember you by name. So make sure that your contact information is very easy to find on your resume, and you know, don't make the blunder of having outdated or inaccurate contact information on there. And finally, load up your resume with keywords. Like I said in the previous slide, they may not understand what they're looking for. They're just doing a text match. So if they're looking for someone with Linux skills and you put Ubuntu on your resume, that's not going to result in a positive match. So go ahead and put everything, throw everything you can on there. You may want to keep a sane version of your resume for when you're working directly with a company, but the recruiter version should have as many buzzwords on it as you can. Okay. So there's a few final pieces of advice. Every time you talk to a recruiter on the phone or in person or anything like that, they're going to keep a record of the date and time and some notes about what they talked about. So you should do that too. This is really useful if you ever need to reconstruct a conversation or remember, you know, at what point in time you talked to a certain person about a certain thing. And it can be very simple. It can just be in a text file or however you want to keep track of it. But definitely keep track of it. For example, if the recruiter tries to tell you at the beginning of the search to get your interest that the salary range is, you know, pretty high, you'll want to write that down, because later on if you get the job offer and it's for less than what he told you, you'll have a record of what he told you and when, and it'll still be your word against his, but at least you won't be relying on your memory to say, I think he said it was going to be something like this. You should always ask who the client is. Usually when a recruiter calls you, he'll tell you about the title of the position and the type of work and maybe the industry, but won't start off with telling you what company it is. But knowing the company is very helpful. It helps you search them on the internet. It helps you know if you even want to work there. Some people don't want to ever work for a bank, for example, or they don't want to work for the government. So, you know, finding that out up front was going to save some time. Now, some recruiters don't like to tell you who the client is because they're afraid that you'll submit your resume directly to the company and go around them, and then they won't get their commission. But this shouldn't be a problem if you're qualified, because the only problem is if the recruiter doesn't think you're qualified, he won't send your resume to the client, and so he doesn't want you to send it to the client on the off chance that the client might think you're qualified and then hire you, because then he's missed an opportunity. So if you're reasonably qualified for the job, they'll usually tell you what the company is, with the exception of confidential searches, which I mentioned before. They're not allowed to tell you until such time as you're interviewing with that company directly. And be willing to relocate. There's a trend right now against relocation because a lot of people have family issues. Either they're caring for, elderly parents, or they have a family situation where if they leave, their kids are going to end up staying here. So relocation is not as common as it once was, or their spouse has a career or something like that. So it helps you if you're willing to relocate. There's not much you can do about that if you're not willing to relocate, but that's just a bullet point there. The next one is something I actually mentioned on the previous slide, is to get the straight story from the hiring manager at the client company. And don't put too much faith in what you hear from the recruiter, because they may not have understood it, they may have oversold it, or they may just have their story wrong. If possible, you should also talk to the other people in the group that you'll be working with, not just the manager, because that helps you get a broader perspective on what the position is like. And the last bullet point on there is that candidates are the raw material for recruiters. They're paid by the client, and they're looking out for your interests. Nobody's looking out for your interests except for you, which goes back to the first bullet point. You should keep records of everything that happens when you're dealing with a recruiter, or really when you're dealing with any hiring process. It doesn't have to be through a recruiter. Okay. I guess I made up some time in that last part because I finished ahead of schedule. Final chance to ask any questions. Here's what our goals were when we started the presentation. If you don't think we covered all those, it's your chance to ask. Or if you have any other questions at all, now's a great time to ask them.
Similar keywords, Nortel is a giant company that make a lot of things, and they want someone who was experienced with this Nortel product line, and I have experience with a different product line. And so I wrote the recruiter in long letters saying, here's how the industry works, here's what I have experience with, and here's what your position is looking for. Did I burn a bridge, or did I build a link with this recruiter who's now thankful that I saved him some time by not courting me to this position and then including it into what to look for in other?
Well, unfortunately, the answer is it depends. The best case would be that he would incorporate that information into his knowledge bank or whatever. I would say that you didn't burn a bridge. If they were sending you an unsolicited questionnaire, they didn't have high expectations for forming a lasting relationship anyway. But I also wouldn't say that you necessarily started a relationship on a good foot. They don't really care. They're focused on the search that they're working on today, and they're not going to remember favors that you did for them in the future. I actually had a slide about this that I took out because I thought I was going to run long. In recruiting, especially in retained recruiting, they're focused very specifically on today's search and who can help them today. And it's very rare that someone will impress them so much that they'll go back to that person in the future. So, although I think you did the right thing, I don't think it's necessarily going to pay off for you. Mm-hmm.
They don't seem to have any particular position in mind. They just, I called them a few months ago, and they talk to me every couple of weeks, like, hey, are you working? Where are you working? What are you doing? I don't tell them too much, but, I try to find out what positions they have available.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have something in California or whatever. Well, I don't want to relocate, but what's their deal? Why are they keeping in touch?
I don't know. Have you sent them a resume?
I have a resume up on Monster.
Okay. I don't actually know. I think that they could be a contingency company that has a number of searches, and then every time one runs into a sticky spot, they might be just calling everyone that's in their database of recent contacts. Or they might not be a recruiting company at all. They might be some sort of other type of employment service. Because the weird thing is that they call themselves a talent agency. When they're talking to candidates, it seems like headhunters are really upfront about saying they're a recruiter and they're working on a particular search. Okay.
But she doesn't say they're a headhunter or whatever the term is. The term she's used is in the company, I'm pretty sure. And it
Interesting.
sounds like they want to have a database of people before the positions come along. So when someone asks a
Yeah.
candidate, they have someone to program in that position. Is the impression I get.
Yeah. Talent.
So you said they might not be a headhunter firm. Can you put this all in context and what other sorts of employment companies are out there?
Sure, sure. Talent company sounds like it might be a marketing term for recruiting company, and they might be trying to build a database. Maybe they're new and they don't have a database of contacts from previous years. That's just speculation. There's a spectrum of business services that are offered by consulting companies, and one thing that they offer is recruiting services. A related service would be like a temporary agency. Some business consultants offer temp services even at the executive level. You can get a temporary CEO, for example. Some services are consulting services. They have, let's say they have Java programmers, and they'll hire them out at an hourly rate. But then they'll have sort of a try before you buy package where they'll hire a programmer, let's say, for a 3-month contract, and then if the company likes them at the end of the contract, they can pay a bunch of money and hire that guy. So those are two other variations on the recruiting spectrum. This talk focused strictly on the recruiting side of things, but there are other business consulting services that are near recruiting and placement that are akin to it. Yes?
So how motivated is the recruiter to make sure you stay there for 6 months or 12 months? Is their pay dependent upon how long you stay?
Usually not. Usually they want to get you in as quickly as possible to accelerate, either how soon they get paid or how many searches they can do in a given unit of time. And then if they have that performance guarantee where they say, we guarantee this guy will stick around for a year, they obviously want you to stay at least that long. Beyond that, it gets into sort of the softer side of things. They obviously have a vested interest in having happy customers. So if you stay around longer rather than leaving on, after 13 months, they'll have a happier customer. So there's no financial incentive to place long-lasting employees.
So they don't care about the so-called onboarding process. They don't care. I mean, other than some minimum amount of time, they don't care whether you stay or go. In fact, they're probably happier if you're looking again.
Sure, because they've already placed you once. They probably feel they can place you again. Yeah, like I said, the only issue is that company may not use the recruiting firm again if they tend to place people who are a flight risk.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anybody looking for?
Actually, if anyone is looking for a job, get in touch with me because my company has a few open positions for Java programmers and people who are good at installing and configuring complicated systems. So catch me in the hall or whatever. Yes?
How does a firm here in Cleveland cope with the overall drain from here to the coasts?
I missed the first part of the question.
How does a firm, a search firm, a recruiting firm here in Cleveland, or you name it, Northeast Ohio, center of the country,
Yes.
cope with the drain to the coasts?
It's an interesting question because it's one that I've been grappling with myself because a number of people that I've worked with in the past have done exactly that. They've left for California or Boston or whatever. And it's really a serious challenge because, first of all, the weather here is crappy. And secondly, the economy's not much better than the weather. It's been rough past 5 or 10 years in Cleveland, or actually in the Midwest in general, with a few exceptions like Chicago and some of the bigger cities. And so that's it's a serious issue not just for recruiters, but for companies in general. Just finding people who are willing to work in Cleveland rather than go to